Okay, welcome back to the second day of our Dharma festival to dwell on, listen to, think about, contemplate, imagine everything around compassion. And that too, great compassion. Just imagine how wonderful it is, what a precious opportunity it is, particularly given the uncertainty of the next moment, which is very much affirmed and kind of clarified by pandemic, which when seen in this form, of course, it has its own difficult aspects, very difficult aspects. But when we think from this side, from this angle, this could be counted as a blessing. Not necessarily from the pandemic by itself, but by our skillfulness in approaching it, that this side of it can be experienced. So, and this has always been the case. The next moment is always uncertain, nor do we see what would come, and nor is it certain in terms of how it will come. So in that respect, this is indeed a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for all of us to be spending our time meaningfully, dharma-fully, if you will, Buddha-fully, Bodhisattva-fully. So I really, really think seriously about it. So I thank you all for this great, great opportunity. Not that I have great things to say, but you just wanted me to have this opportunity to say and reflect on, kind of force me into something good. So that's how I really, really take it to be. So in that respect, I wouldn't take too much of your time in reflection, but let's sit in meditation for a while, and we will try certain reflection. So find yourself in a comfortable position with your backs upright. Try to connect to this moment here and now by being aware of oneself through the sensations of the body in general, and that of the sensation of touch, be that of your feet, your back, your hands, the gesture they are, the seat that you are seated in. Kind of feel assured of your groundedness, of your stability. And then on that basis, let's take 3 rounds of deep, deliberate breathing. This we will do in sync at my signal. We will begin with in-breath and then exhale it. In between, if need be, pausing at our will. So breathing in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. 3 rounds in a deep, measured way. Let's begin. And slowly take the time in adjusting this rhythm of breathing to slow down to a natural one, where you let the breathing just be however it requires to be, breathing in and out through the nostrils. Take one's time in adjusting it slowly but gradually to its own natural rhythm, where you let the breathing just take place on its own, irrespective of however it requires to be. Let it be just how it requires to be, without trying to regulate the breathing, without trying to control it or impose any specific strength, length, rhythm, force, none of that. Let it be just however it requires to be. All we try to do is let the mind keep pace with it, but feeling it by sensing it, almost walking hand in hand, relaxedly, calmly, easily, totally giving in to the breathing for however it requires to be. And all we do is keep company to the breathing by feeling the sensations of the breathing along its path, be that at the entrance of the nostrils, inside the nostrils, both ways when we inhale and exhale. And in staying with the breath, together with sensing its feelings, try to do so alertly, attentively, ardently, infused with a sense of delight, enthusiasm in being with the breath that one tries to do with some intentional attention, focus on it, and with some degree of freshness of approach, all combined together in being with the breath. In this way, try to be with the natural breathing, one breath at a time, round after round, for as long as one can. In the process of doing so, try to let go of any temptations to hold on to the breath, to fix it, to figure out something, to worry about whether one is doing it properly or not. Just let go of all of that. All we do is just be with the breath, feeling one's awareness fully with that of the breath and the sensations of it, without giving into all those extraneous distractions. This we try to do with those factors in place, namely attentiveness, alertness, delightfulness. Now slowly let go of this focus on the breath. Let's go back in time and imagine being in somewhere in India or other rural place where their source of water is a pond, where they have this kind of a pulley kind of a structure there to pull the water with a bucket or few buckets tied to it. And someone is on the side pulling the rope or some mechanism by which it could let the bucket or the buckets go down, get water, come back, pour it out into another container outside of the well. And then it keeps on doing this. The others come up, they go down like that. The buckets have no way to get away from that routine because they are tied with tight ropes. And in the meantime, as they go down and come up, the bang against the walls of the deep well, and then as they reach the bottom, they kind of position themselves in such a way that they take in water, become heavy, and it becomes difficult to be pulled up, unlike when it was going down empty. And it keeps on going. And beyond the range of those ropes, it had nowhere to go, irrespective of how many times it goes down and comes up. It just keeps on in that loop. Now imagine ourselves, each one of us, in the either being those buckets or in those buckets. The person outside the well has now have had a has a big job. Not only the buckets, but even the buckets are filled with each one of us. But with the weight, it goes down even more easy. But when it comes to pulling up, not only we have to be pulled, but the bucket, whatever space is remaining there, it has water in it. We are drenched. The bucket has whatever space left filled with water. On top of that, we are drenched. It adds to the weight. Now it is so difficult for the poor guy pulling it, almost to the point of letting go. When it does, that will mean a very hard bang on the bottom of the well. But he or she wouldn't do that because that would mean more problems for that person. Now think of us also being tied to the buckets, right? We have no choice but to be with the bucket and suffer that same routine, up and down, up and down. And in the meantime, every time we go down, come up, we bang against the wall even harder than before. We bang with our heads, legs, backs, shoulders. Every time we go down and come back, we come up with wounds everywhere, cuts, wounds. We have no way to let go, to be off the hook. We're kind of hooked in. Although as we come out, it is relatively better. You can feel the fresh air. There may be birds chirping, whatnot. But as soon as you get to the peak, it's time to think of going down. And when it goes down, at the point we enter into the well, there's more suffering. No fresh air, not much room to see, no light to see. And then we bum on the bottom, pick up the water, get even more weight, and have hard time climbing up. No matter how much we wish to be at the top, it gets much harder. So the ropes tying us are our afflictions and the karmas induced by them. Our karmas, our own actions are what we inherit that bind us. And it's quite evident in our life from the very first day, from the get-go. We have certain boundaries set beyond which we can't, even if we want it. And that remains the same until that. And then the person pulling from outside is our own unruly, untamed, mostly negatively influenced, negatively trained mind with very little, if any, positive qualities, which are all stained, limited, constrained, not pure purities. To that level, it gets us to the top in the light, but that's just limited. And the afflictions, the hold of the rope is so tight because of the very strongly entrenched disposition of grasping, self-grasping. The term self-grasping is a little misleading. I don't know how, particularly to an unfamiliar person, what that would sound like, but that is the grasping at inherent existence, the innate one, not the acquired one, but rather the innate one. So securely positioned, building a stronghold within our heart, that the afflictions that kind of come out of it have no choice, no chance, almost no chance ever to part with it or to part with us. And with that, the consequences are inevitable. So when we were in the bucket, it would seem like someone is before us, but as soon as we go down and come up and look up, the one who was behind us was before us. So there is no particular order in who comes first and who comes the next. And so it's the same case with the 12 links that we go through. What seems like preceding us immediately seems like following us, and we are leading them. That's how the chain doesn't get broken at all. So long as the stronghold, hardcore stronghold of self-grasping is securely housed in the core of our being. And in the meantime, the banks that we have no choice but to feel and suffer are like the incessant, continuing moments of these three sufferings: sufferings of pain, suffering of change, suffering of the pervasive conditioning. Particularly the suffering, the pervasive conditioning is constantly there, always ready to serve as a base for any pronounced suffering, be that in the form of actual pain or in the form of this deceiving, fake facade of joy, but already inbuilt with suffering to follow inevitably. And it keeps on going. It's not just once and forever, once and done. It's not a one-off thing, as the expression goes. It is what is going to go on and on with no end in sight. It's like a traveler, keep on going without chance of ever stopping, without having the privilege of ever stopping and drinking, reaching out for drink or whatever. Keep moving, but with no chance, no prospect whatsoever of ever ending the destination. This is the way the samsara is. It's almost like a sick person who keeps seeking relief and healing, but the condition is such that there is no prospect for that illness to ever end. Keep on going like that. So unless and until we recognize where the crux lies of all this mechanism, unless we try to break that, there is no prospect for that. And all of these efforts that we make in the meantime are meaningless. They do not lead to any eventual solution at all. So all the efforts that we make in samsara, they're like efforts just for the sake of efforts for our own satisfaction, but not leading to any kind of a solution whatsoever. Things goes up and then comes down, goes up, temporarily comes down back. Right now, we are like prisoners who are right now on parole. Kind of relative calm, relative kind of relief, but we should not mistake it for a permanent thing. Soon it's going to end. Our aging, sickness, impending deaths around are all signals that this is evident to come. And now expand this to others. Others are no different. But first and foremost, we have to see this so clearly on ourselves. Cannot be ever making jokes about this. Cannot be ever thinking this is a joke. This is not. From our own experience, it's quite clear. At least it is evident for this life. Now the question is it just this? Which means no way to account for what preceded it, what would follow it. Whereas in reality, everything without exception, not necessarily just consciousness or person, everything, even the slightest thing as a pencil has to have something to come from. And that cause to come from somewhere. Nothing can come from nothing. So is the case with what entails it. It doesn't stop there. It may change forms, but it will have to continue in one form or the other. That's the case just with everything without exception, not just us. So I think this has taken so long. We'll stop here. At your own convenience, come out of the meditation, opening your eyes and lifting your gaze. Okay, so yeah, one word before I move on about this contemplation. So for some, particularly for others who are listening online, outside of this Abbey, some who may not be familiar with the Buddhist context may think like, oh, this is depressing to think about. But that's not the case. Even as depressing as this may look, there's a path shown out of it, right? There's a path shown out of it. And so for those who entertain this kind of a worldview, of course, grounded in its own reality, in which we could make cases for that, born out of reason, logic, experiences, evidences around. So it's not something to be just kind of what do you call easily, thrown away. But nonetheless, if this is something too much at this point, we do similar things with whatever conditions are unpleasant. And unless and until we recognize what is unpleasant as unpleasant, we wouldn't give rise to any aspiration to be free from that. And without that, no actions in getting out of it ever will follow. With that, the condition would never, ever change. So that's the reason why Buddha started with pointing at sufferings, and he called that understanding as seeing suffering, seeing true suffering as suffering. Not mistaking pleasant thing to suffering and a suffering to a pleasant thing, but recognizing suffering for what it is. Not mistaking it for others, not mistaking others for it, but recognizing it for what it is. And then this leads to the question of, is there a way out of it? What causes it? And again, there also one has to do a good job in recognizing the true cause of it, not just be contented with able to point finger at something, but rather point finger at the true cause of it. And then wonder whether this true cause can be addressed, can be overcome, can be counteracted. Is there something to be done about it? Without actually doing it, but kind of exploring whether there can be something to be done, if there is technically or in principle a way out of it, an end to that. If that kind of a light at the end of the tunnel sparks to oneself, then one would have to make the effort in moving, in taking the strides towards that end, and then one would get closer and closer. So that's basically the Four Noble Truths. So that's the reason why Buddha started with the suffering, not because he wanted all of us to suffer in the midst of that reflection, but rather so that we would take the first step right to the direction of release from it. So that's why reflecting on the unpleasant situations is meaningful. And likewise, for those who who do not necessarily buy into this Buddhist worldview, nonetheless, we all have this. We all have in common this life in front of us, which is itself mired in problems, troubles, and at least from a Buddhist perspective, you said that. But from other perspective, you could say yes, it is perfect, but perfect in a sense when the entirety is taken into account, when each one of this is part of the mosaic and whatnot, but each of them by themselves are problematic. They are in friction with things that needed to be adjusted every now and then. So nonetheless, there is this problem to be fixed, and this begins with recognizing it. In simple, plain sense, we experience sufferings, we experience unpleasantness, we experience difficulties, and very often those are self-created. We virtually live our own individual. We virtually live in our own individual world with our own individual creation of other beings. It is so interesting, right? So one, almost like one is the creator there. One could make the decision of how easy that world could be, or should be, or how difficult we want to get it in. That's not to totally rule out any objective reality of other things, but in terms of how we relate to things, whatnot, we very often get stuck in our own projection of what others are in the first place, and then take that for granted, don't even question it. And then very often, because of our own incompleteness, our own limitations or whatnot, given our, say, from a Buddhist perspective, disposition, habituation from so long back in time, or even for anyone, our own habituation, disposition in this life from the very first moment, from the very first step that we took, we kind of either got caught in a not perfect system, fueled by negativities, for whatever reason, for vested interests, because of ignorance, confusion, intentional, whatever, for whatever short, what interest it may be, it is kind of in abundance. And then plus our own limitations. All of those kind of fuel to this already breeding ground of confusion and ignorance, and that builds up to this projection of negativity. And that too with some sense of justification, all of those. And that gets cemented. We use this expression in the scriptures, in the monasteries. When we have debating time and the debating bell goes, someone who is very reflective has been really thinking, kind of in a way to remind the monks to come back on the track rather than get carried away by their philosophical what do you call extravaganza. Some would say, oh, where are you going? Are you going to put water in the cement? You already have a cement there. Are you going to put water in the cement in making it more strong? That's saying that when you go to the debating courtyard, be reminded what the purpose behind that is, not to solidify your self-grasping, which is already quite solid, but rather kind of look through it, try to come back slightly softened in that. So without this kind of a reminder, these kind of a privileges of people showing us and our own luck in kind of wondering about this, we almost keep constantly pouring water in the already concrete cement. So all of these contribute to this suffering that we reel in, irrespective of our own beliefs, whatnot. In that respect, there's this need of knowing what is wrong and what leads to it, irrespective of how unpleasant it may be to really find out the dirts within oneself. One has to find it out, and then where it comes from, and then see if something can be done, and then do it. So we can apply this mechanism of following the model, Four Noble Truths model, just about in any context, with any range of our dealing. Okay, so that's what I wanted to put into perspective. And even as Buddhists also, not all of these, what do you call, perspectives are the right fitting things for everyone. We will be dealing with this, grappling with this, and trying it out at our own level, and then kind of inching our way ahead progressively. Okay, that's it. Now we will pick up from where we did yesterday, where we left yesterday. Yeah, so yesterday we completed stanza 6. So I urge you not to unnecessarily feel rushed, okay, to go faster. That would be a suffering, and nor will I try to get into that. So we'll go at our own pace, and so feel relaxed, right? So stanza 6. Again, I wanted to review this a little bit. I praise you, great compassion, whose defining characteristics is the desire to protect all aged mothers and sentient beings from the subtle and gross fears of samsara and nirvana. Yeah, I was commenting on this use of the term, English term, existence and pacification. That's really quite misleading, particularly if people were to take existence literally for existence and saying, oh, Buddhists are striving so hard so that they could go out of existence, because this is one of the fears that they try to get over with. Whereas it is samsara. I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, we are stuck in existence. There's no way we can get out of existence. And I don't know who chose for us to be in the existence, but we are stuck. We cannot go out of existence. We better do try to exist well, not like the way those buckets in the water wheel are subject to, but rather get out of it, right? So, but in terms of being in the existence, there is no way. There is just no way we can ever. There are allusions to that in the Abhidhamma texts and in the individual liberation practices, whatnot, but they are all, at least from a Bodhisattvayana practice point of view, they are all provisional. They have specific reasons for the Buddha to teach so, but those are interpretive teachings with specific purpose to be fulfilled in certain situations, in certain circumstances, but not to be taken literally. So not that those teachings go waste. They had their own purpose. So would it serve even to this day in certain situations? It's like It's like adjusting the Dharma to fit the situation, with the bottom line to help someone, even if it takes adjusting it a little bit here and there. But the bottom line is always to benefit someone, and there also to choose between benefiting them in the long run and that of only serving something temporarily. If both can be achieved, the best. If out of the two, one has to be sacrificed, it would be the temporary pleasantness, temporary convenience or ease that has to be sacrificed for the long-term benefit. So that's how all of these teachings, irrespective of how they on the surface almost contradict each other, given by Buddha himself, all ultimately serve this purpose. And for someone to be able to give such teaching has to be someone who could see more, see further, see deeper than we ordinarily know by seeing. We are stuck with this moment. The next moment we don't see. It's almost like driving in the dark with very little dim light on your headlight. It's like you just barely see enough to push forward, but not ahead of it. And in our case, it is even worse. We don't even see anything ahead of it, just here and the now. So, whereas in the case of advanced practitioners, advanced masters, and whatnot, by training in those mechanisms, by making use of those spiritual technologies that they would have developed within themselves, they can see far and deep and whatnot, and thus align their teaching accordingly. And thus, in such a scenario, it is possible for the teachings to be seemingly twisted, but not in the ultimate, all serving the same purpose of benefiting the subject. So that's why the use of the term existence for samsara is quite misleading. I think I may have recounted this to you. There were occasions when some other people criticized Buddhism for proposing this path to going out of existence. Right? There was a great uproar. I do not need to mention things by name, but I needed to point that occasion. That did happen. Right? But there is no way we can get out of existence. So that thing also we have to remember. Right? We're stuck. Now it will only make sense to fare well while staying in existence. And there are prospects, wonderful prospects, that if we can avail of them, we can. And this idea about always staying put, not ever getting out of existence. Of course, we can speak of going extinct and whatnot, but that's on a provisional level, associated with particular form and structure, whatnot. But in terms of being, in terms of our core being, there is no point of severance. Just as we can speak, even in the case of a pencil like that, in terms of the material that has come to become the pencil, and it will remain in one form or the other, either in the case of the pencil, in the form of being spread out, or as union or whatnot, as its unitary thing, or spread or whatnot. It would have to, right? So there is nothing mysterious about things continuing. And in the case of beings, because we have this additional component of our nature, the psycho component, not just the physical, but the psycho component of it, which is absent in other things, that has to be accounted for in terms of the continuity also. So that particularly, not in its grossest form. At the grossest form, we can pretty much speak in the same tune as in the case of pens and pencils associated with a particular structure, kind of coming into existence and going out of existence. But in terms of the subtle material of it, particularly the subtlest clear-letter mind, it has no point of creation, nor would it come to stop. And usually I take resort to convey this idea. I take resort to the idea already accepted in physics. I have shared this with you. There may be others also. I do not have the confidence in saying of other topics, but there is one about the electric charge. Even the scientists so confidently say it's never created, nor does it get destroyed. It only is transferred from, it kind of differs in the distribution, but it only continues on. It's not created anew, nor destroyed forever. If even on a physical thing, there can be something like that. Why not on a consciousness thing? And then on the topic of consciousness, although I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but because I've already touched on it, please bear with me. On the point of consciousness, particularly the subtlest, because all levels of consciousness are eventually eventually they boil down to, I don't know how else to say it. Eventually they boil down to, eventually they kind of
Distilled?
Pardon?
Distilled?
Oh,
distilled, subsumed?
Yeah, maybe you could say that, subsumed, distilled, but eventually it boils down to it. I don't know what was it. Yeah, it comes down to the subtlest clear-eyed mind. Now, in the case of the subtlest clear-eyed mind, by its very nature, it doesn't even need to go through any change, except in our case, we are not able to retain it for long in an active form. And even if we do have it within us, we have hardly any control over it. And thus, no prospect ever of employing it, operating on it, functioning on it. That's where we are lacking. If only we could do that, on the part of the subtlest consciousness itself, there is no need for going through any kind of a transformation or transmutation. Whereas in the case of all the gross consciousnesses, including the afflictions, for a change to happen, it has to happen through the process of transformation, transmutation, moving from its current form to something else, more pure, improved. Not in the case of in the case of the subtlest clear light mind. Okay, so that's how we make the case, because eventually, ultimately, that's what existence as a being hinges on, and that has no creation, no destruction. Okay, so what led me to this? Yes, the question about existence. Yeah, existence. To translate samsara for the Tibetan term sipa as existence, and kind of borrow that same term for the same sounding term sipa in the 12th link of dependent origination, the 10th one, calling it existence. It's very, I think it is misleading, particularly to someone who is unfamiliar with the context. So somehow over the years, somehow the English terms for Buddhist, or you could call English jargons for Buddhist concepts, have kind of evolved in almost like two different worlds. one in the Dharma centers, where the words can be understood by the Dharma center members, but not by people outside of it. Let alone that's rife with prospect of misunderstanding. And then those who are in the academic world or whatnot, they strive hard. Because they sense this, they strive hard because of their audience, whatnot. They strive hard to really convey these words, these concepts in a totally different Dharma center, unfamiliar words. And they kind of remain separate worlds. There's this need of really a communication and feeding each other. And that way, I mean, there would be just one Buddhist world that would open up. And that could really go long way in really conveying, retaining, conveying the pure Buddha Dhamma. I emphasize this because in one of in I think in Dodege, in the ornament of sutras by Maitreya, I think there is a stanza where he pleads people not to mix up Buddha's Dharma. Keep it there. Whenever, if you are bringing up something new, you clearly declare this disclaimer that this is not I'm claiming to be the Buddha's teaching, but rather I'm coming up with my own. And he pleads there in that particular stanza, I have it somewhere, where he pleads that no, when it comes to these things, Buddha knows the best. You cannot know more than the Buddha. That what Buddha says, stay put. Don't mix it up, because that can have very big, very, very grave consequences in the context of people's prospect for genuine joy and happiness and their prospect of progressing on the path. So I'm using this as a pretext, as a context to expand on something else that I had deep in my mind for so long. And so, if I may, again, take a few minutes. Lately, I have been thinking, because my work involves translation, lately I have been thinking, thinking in going against the convention in translating things. Like in the case here, I could be using samsara and nirvana, or I could come up with some totally different word, which would not have any direct connection with what is being conveyed there, but that captures the meaning, irrespective of whether, despite the fact that that's not what the original work says, and then have a note attached to it at the end of the page or at the end of the book, saying in the original text, what it says would come to this, but this has been avoided because of that. Usually we do the other way around. We try to stick with whatever the the original work says, and then irrespective of whether it conveys the meaning or not, we kind of try to push for that, we try to kind of stick with that, and then care to put some notes. But very, very rarely people read notes, particularly if they are end notes, which runs into hundreds and hundreds. People hardly care for that. So what they come across is what is there in the text and not the notes. And carries on with that misunderstanding. Sometimes even the misunderstandings connected with one another and what they have heard as hearsay, they kind of really come together, build a world of its own, kind of make a sense. That's how the projections become bigger and bigger and bigger, not for anyone's good. So, sorry, I indulged in this. Okay. So now we move on to stanza 7. Yeah, stanza 7, then stanza 8, and stanza 9. they deal with what we usually call the three types of compassions. Even, yeah, before we do that, let me remind you, we are right now speaking on or focusing on great compassion. So not every compassion is great compassion. Of course, every compassion is great, but not necessarily great compassion. We need compassion, whatever level it is. If at all the world is in crisis and in short supply, it is compassion. In every walks of life. So compassion definitely, in whatever doses it comes, is great. But not every compassion is great compassion. So there is a distinction between compassion and great compassion. And then within what we call compassion, we would have reason to really debate and really kind of look deeper into what really is a compassion and what is not. Or what is the mixed baggage? It's by itself a totally different topic. And then within the genuine compassion, within certain sentiment that we can call compassion, of course, for now we'll be sticking with the Buddhist stand, the Buddhist way of defining compassion. We say at the very core it is a desire or an attitude or a sentiment to relieve others of their suffering. Not necessarily all suffering, all gross and no, others suffering, be that a very apparent superficial one or a deep one, etc., etc. But wish for the others to be freed from the suffering. So we would orient compassion to others and kind of reserve it as some sentiment oriented towards others, directed towards others. And when the same attitude is directed towards us, we could call it by any other names. But that's still not quite Niejung, not quite the spirit of renunciation. So renunciation takes a whole different uh, whole different notion of what constitutes suffering that one is wishing oneself to be freed from. So, but nonetheless, and that same sentiment could be directed towards oneself, and that we will not call compassion for now, right? So there is this compassion, which is the biggest general, the generic, which could have great compassion within it, immeasurable compassion within it, and pure compassion, but not quite the others, and then mixed compassion, whatever, ordinary compassion, whatever, right? Short-lived compassion, and then within that we could have fierce compassion, all of those. That could take place in all of those different groups. So that needs to be appreciated. And then, according to the scriptures, we make a clear distinction between immeasurable compassion and great compassion. Not that they are mutually exclusive necessarily, but at the same time, they are not coextensive. They are not interchangeable. Because technically, from a scripture point of view, any one of those so-called immeasurable attitudes has to be grounded on, has to be grounded on, has to have the dhyana as its material, as its mental material, out of which this structure of particular immeasurable is curved out. But that is not necessary for great compassion, even for great compassion. But there can be great compassion grounded in dhyana, and that would be a case of a, what do you call, a common locus between between immeasurable compassion and great compassion. So what I'm just conveying is, you may already be aware of, but those who are listening outside of the Abbey, for their own interests, sometimes for the interest of kind of juggling these ideas, and then out of this reflection, discussion, wondering, some clarity may come, and sometimes not just clarity on the topic at hand, but it could extend into other insights. So that's the reason why I'm throwing this in. So when we speak of immeasurable compassion, we cannot just merely go by what the word conveys. Immeasurable compassion which is directed to immeasurable beings, and not that, but there are certain elements to be present there. That's the reason why the immeasurable qualities are called Brahma Vihara, not the great compassion, because of its dhyana component. Dhyanas are inescapable. Dhyanas are something that one cannot do without for a birth in any one of the form realms. Depending on what level of dhyana it may be, it has the prospect of even karmically, what do you call, impelling us into a karmic birth in the rupa realm. Whereas great compassion by its very nature doesn't necessarily contain that element. That's why it is not talked of as one of the Brahma Viharas. Even great loving kindness and great compassion, they are not counted among the Brahma Viharas. So that's the reason I'm kind of conveying this. So, yeah, but when we speak of great compassion is not only something that goes to all sentient beings. When I say that goes to all sentient beings, it doesn't necessarily have to be every instant of it, always kind of having every sentient being within its purview. But by potential, it should have that. But when one trains it, one has to train it so that one goes through those steps, and then eventually going through those steps that we talked about yesterday, of specifically training in compassion in relation to those two specific groups of people. Like in Pali tradition, you have this metta bhavana practice where you virtually divide up people direction-wise, right? And then then eventually direct it to every sentient being. So when we speak of immeasurable, it doesn't mean immeasurable as opposed to every sentient being. No, not on that level. It is called immeasurable, directed to immeasurable sentient beings. But it doesn't mean there's still someone left out. No, no, that's not the way. That's not what is meant here. But by calling it immeasurable, it kind of really helps in kind of contextualizing it in terms of the other features needed, kind of assumed to be fulfilled, including the dhyana base, etc. I hope we are already into stanza 6, 7, but we haven't yet dealt with what are the conditions, what are the steps, important, essential steps for cultivating compassion, right? Cultivating compassion, and particularly cultivating great compassion. So maybe we'll move on few stanzas, and then since we'll be dealing with great compassion, and for that matter, compassion invariably if need be, then we will bring this topic up in terms of what are the elements, essential elements needed in developing compassion. So for now, we'll just, for the sake of pushing through the text, we'll move through the first three stanzas from seventh onward. 7th, 8th, and 9th, as I said earlier, it deals with what we call, it deals with a classification of compassion within great compassion. Yeah, we can speak of it within great compassion also. It can be great compassion in the category of the first, in the category of the second, in the category of the third, but all of them nonetheless great compassion. But at the same time, by themselves, there can be compassion short of being great compassion, yet at the same time having those basic elements of being the first compassion conveyed in the 7th stanza or the 8th or the 9th. So the stanza 7th, I praise the compassion that focuses just on the sentient beings, that sees all beings in their suffering aspect, overpowered by their ignorance, like a water wheel in a well of cyclic existence. That was the reason why we did the water well, what would you call that? Water well. Why we did the water well exercise. Okay. So, and then look at the stanza 8. I'm proposing a slightly different version to that, to strike consistency in starting with I praise the compassion that, right? Whereas in the original number 8, it doesn't do that. So number 8, the red one I'm proposing, I praise the compassion that also focuses on phenomena, that sees all beings in their impermanent aspect, like ripples on the surface of a river, not lasting even a moment. And then the 9th one, I praise compassion that also focuses on the objectless, that sees all beings, however they appear to be empty of inherent existence, like the reflection of the moon in water. So clearly here, while dealing with these 3 types of compassion, is dealing with them in the context of great compassion. One clue to that is the mention of all sentient beings as its object of focus. In all of these stanzas, it says all beings, all beings, all beings. In the original stanza 7, it doesn't say that, but it says that in the Tibetan. It must, and it does say that in Tibetan. For those who know Tibetan, you will see that it virtually begins with it. The 7th stanza says, Dokun. Do is migrator of beings. Kun is everyone. Dokun marik shewanki, korwe tumper, sochun shin, tungen number sikbai, semje lamik, yingjer. Yeah, it's quite interesting. In Tibetan, stanza 7, 8, and 9, all of them begin with Dokun, Dokun, all beings, all beings, all beings. So, 7th one, I praise the compassion that focuses just on the sentient beings. So here it says just on the sentient beings. Implying that it doesn't focus on the phenomena, or it doesn't focus on the objectless like the other 2, but it focuses just on the sentient beings. Whereas in terms of focusing on sentient beings, the other 2 compassions also do. That's the reason why in the case of the other 2 compassions, you have also focuses on the phenomena on top of focusing on sentient beings. also focuses on the objectless, on top of focusing on the sentient beings. So that part has to be remembered. That's the reason why I insisted on inserting those, just those within the parent, within the brackets, and they have their sources in authentic texts, particularly including that of the illumination of the intent by Tsongkhapa, and as well as in the I think in the Rangdel, in the auto commentary of Chandrakirti on his entering the middle way. So all of these are great compassions, and thus must focus on all sentient beings. And in terms of its mode of apprehension, in terms of what does it do, what does it feel by focusing on sentient beings, it arises, or it forms out in the sense of in the sense of, or in the form of desiring them or wishing them to be freed from the suffering. So this is one area I have difficulty conveying in English satisfactorily. I think Venerable Thupten Chodonla and I have dealt with this in the course of our working on the books, and we have come up with the term observe, as opposed to focus being used here. What is its object of observation? What is its object of apprehension? We try to kind of separate the two concepts through the help of those words. But here I've chosen to keep the term focus here as opposed to observe, and then the aspect part of it is its mode of apprehension. So in Tibetan we speak of mikpa and namba. Suppose you are looking at a pot and you think that it is good or it is old. The pot will be the object of focus or the object of observation. Its being good or bad or old or whatnot would account for its object of apprehension. What does it apprehend on? What does it apprehend on the object by directing the attention on it? Or not just directing, maybe by directing by directing attention. Well, the attention goes both ways, on the basis as well as on its quality. But you project that, or you uphold that quality in relation to some base. So the so-called base is the object of focus or the object of observation. And then what you apprehend on top of that, without losing it, but on top of that, what do you top up on that in terms of your apprehension? That is called the object of apprehension. So in the case of compassion, invariably, every compassion, irrespective of how advanced, how developed, whatnot, at least from the way we are defining in the Buddhist text, is it has to have this aspect or the mode of apprehension as wishing to be freed from suffering, desiring to relieve someone from suffering. So that will be the object of apprehension or its aspect, which it would be generating or wishing on a particular base, right? So in the case of the great compassion, which is what all these three are, with their own internal differences, in that it has as its object of focus all sentient beings. It is not only focused on sentient beings, but all sentient beings without exception. Say in the case of a great compassion, what do you call, immediately focus on one particular person, it could be called focusing on all sentient beings at that point, because if it were to be turned to anyone, it would still have the same force of compassion, because the way it has been trained, it would be kind of seeing the same suffering in every sentient being, and thus be able to generate the same force, irrespective of who that being is in relation to oneself, etc. So all of these compassions has this, all sentient beings, irrespective, without exception, as its object of focus. Now, it is very interesting. It gives us a peek into the Bodhisattva's mentality, how expansive, generous, giving, open it is. Usually we try to generate compassion, and our compassion is usually directed towards far off people that we don't know, somewhere over there, except for this person here in front of me. Except for him, oh, may all sentient beings be happy, free from suffering. But this one is exceptional. I wouldn't budge, right? So for whatever reason, and we feel justified in thinking, oh, he or she did this, could speak this to, so he or she, I really need to settle the score, right? I really need to settle the score. Except for this, may all sentient beings be happy. Yeah, in the case of the bodhisattvas, of course, those who are in training would have to really struggle in keeping to that, whatnot. But yeah, in their most ideal form, it really is amazing to see what we have a potential for, how we could train our mind to be. And when we do so, what would be the associated feelings with it? And how would we carry ourselves around? And how would we respond to situations from that place of openness, generosity, care? And we all have this potential. Very often in the scriptures, particularly in the Brahmana texts, in the texts on epistemology and logic, in the Brahmana text, through reasoning and logic, it dwells so much on this particular power, this particular capacity of mind, as opposed to material things. Material things, irrespective of whatever they may be or what they may be made of, they would always have a limit in how much they can go, not in the case of mind. Provided one could persist in the training, the sky is the limit, or there is no limit. Maybe you could say sky is the limit, that's fine, but outwardly it almost seems like setting a limit there. But sky is such that you could keep going without hitting any ceiling, right? So that's good enough. So very often His Holiness the Dalai Lama doubles down on this point, and he says that yes, if you really want to pay attention and indulge in and really spend all your money, time, attention, whatnot, do that on the qualities of the mind, in building the qualities of the mind. There, you don't have to worry about hitting a limit. The more you train in it, the more it kind of becomes expansive, the more it becomes easier to activate, easier to access. So much so that eventually there wouldn't be any need of kind of, what do you call, conceptually preparing for it, kind of going through the steps of contemplation, eventually, what do you call, molding the mind into that particular form, and then kind of arresting it. Rather, one could just start right away, have great compassion spontaneously, because of how one has trained. Not only one has to wait for it to arrive, it could be kind of latent there, it could be kind of on the whole there ever to be accessed right away. Very similar to how the frogs jump. I'm really amazed by how the frogs jump. They don't seem to really, what do you call, do a jump start? Or is that what you call? They don't have to kind of take 2-3 steps back and then jump. They just jump right away from there. We humans, no matter whoever we may be, athletes or so many gold medals, whatnot, we still have to kind of take several steps behind and then move and run and then only eventually just barely break our own record or just be at par with it. But every time we have to do that. And then when the years go by, we lose that even. Not in the case of mind. Of course, initially, one would have to kind of go over again and again and again and again. And then there is an inbuilt quality in the mind that the more you develop it, the more you train in it, the more it becomes easier to come about. Eventually, so much so that it will be just right then and there to call up, not having to really take few minutes. I don't know, what is the English term? Is jumpstart the right term? Say in the case of jumping, when you take 2-3 steps back or several yards back and then move from there, what do you call that?
Running start.
Pardon?
A running start.
Okay, running start. Okay, yes. So it could be a running start, jumping start, whatever. One has to do that, right? One can't just right away jump like frogs do. I'm really amazed how they could do it. But they would be kind of pushing it against the ground and then jumping, right? But still, that's quite amazing. They don't need any extra space to jump. Okay. So it's quite amazing to really kind of even imagine what it would feel like to be up and about with this kind of a mind with us. How would the world will change? How would the world change? It's like you have an alchemy within you, and then now everything you touches turns into gold. And then in the case of the bodhisattvas, not only the conducive conditions, the unfavorable conditions, the sufferings, challenges, there's something to look forward to because they gain even more strength from that and have the confidence in turning them around. Oh, it's amazing to think about this. Yeah, this definitely is. So in the case of the three compassions, the first one is called compassion, which focuses on just the sentient beings, not on the phenomena or on the objectless as just the other two. But nonetheless, it is great compassion in that it is directed towards all sentient beings. And then in the case of great compassion, as I said earlier, and as it is conveyed somewhere above. Oh yeah, in the immediate sixth stanza, whose defining characteristic is the desire to protect all aged mother sentient beings, that is all beings, from subtle and gross fears of samsara and nirvana. So no fear is left out. No suffering is left out, be that of samsara or nirvana. So here, using the term fear is just a way of doing it. It could be obstacles, obscurations, defilements, all of that. Nothing left out when it comes to anything that stands in the way of people's prospect of joy and happiness. And not only stands in the way, but even create suffering, whatnot. All of those would fall in the purview of what the bodhisattvas would wish for others, irrespective, to be freed from. And then in terms of, in terms of the nature of suffering, right, all of these qualifying as they are as great compassion, they do not leave out any aspect of suffering. So now we may wonder, what then makes them different? At least we can see in the in the case of the focus, the difference is there. Yeah, so let's look at stanza 7 again. I praise the compassion that focuses just on the sentient beings. It would be better off to leave out just in this case, but I put it there. Even without the insertion there, the message will be captured, because in the next two ones you have also, so that will say not only on the sentient beings but also on the phenomena. So it seems like it reads better if we leave out the just. I praise the compassion that focuses on the sentient beings, or just on the sentient beings, that sees all beings in their suffering aspect, overpowered by their ignorance, like a water wheel in a well of cyclic existence. So here, again, we have to remember, not every compassion has to be concerned about people's being in the cyclic existence, right? No, and all compassion has to be concerned about beings being stuck or being plagued by cognitive obscuration. But in the case of great compassion, it's what do you call it? It's sensibility kind of really goes full swing, and thus it leaves no suffering out in feeling this sense of others, in feeling this sense, this wish for others to be freed from. And thus that includes suffering in the cyclic existence. Ordinarily, we could have compassion of so many different ranges, right? Or it could be just concerned about someone's very, very immediate conditions, immediate sufferings, or long-term conditions, and that could still be within the range of just suffering or pain, or else then it could go a little further into suffering of change, or suffering of temporary deceptive change that you worry about others to be kind of freed from. Or else, from a Buddhist perspective, it could go beyond this life and then wish others to be freed from the prospect of having to be born in the lower realms. Like in the case of the wheel metaphor, worrying at least between being in the air and inside the well, it seems like in the air is little more enjoyable. So wishing others to stay put in the open air above the well, but that cannot be, right? So anyway, for the time being, one could attain relief from the even worse sufferings of lower realms, and thus wish others to be to be born in the higher realms, in the upper realms, although nonetheless within the samsara, but relatively relatively a more pleasant or happier place to be. Or else it could extend beyond just that, and then think of the entire cyclic existence condition to be miserable, and thus wish others to be freed from cyclic existence. So in the case of the bodhisattvas, I mean, it would leave no suffering out of it. So definitely cyclic existence would be, if you could call the threshold, if you will. Although I would rather not call it threshold. It would be all comprehensive, just as in the previous stanza it says, the fears both of samsara and nirvana. So this may be just a way of calling it. Where is it? Yeah, Tungé number Simje. Korvet Chumper Sochunshi. Yeah. Okay, so great compassion at that level, the what do you call the domain, the extent, the domain, the depth of suffering takes a totally new level. So does it in terms of extending extension. So does it in the sense of the subject matter, the subject, the base extent of it, without leaving any sentient being. Now let's move on to the 8th stanza. Dokun chuyu nyarmashi kichik samya mitupe mita number 6 by chul mikwe. I praise the compassion that also focuses on phenomena, that sees all beings in their impermanent aspect, like ripples on the surface of a river, not lasting even a moment. In the case of this second compassion, as well as in the case of the third compassion, the metaphor being used is the same. Moon's reflection in the water. Even reflection of the moon has a role in conveying the meaning and the significance, ramification, or the dynamics of the second compassion also. Although it is not mentioned here, but the reflection of the moon in the river, right? In the river, going through or observed in two different ways can serve as a metaphor separately for these two great compassions. So here it says it also focuses on the phenomena. So it focuses on sentient beings as the basis upon which it wishes for them to be freed from the suffering. But what it brings additional, what additional thing it brings on the plate, as the expression goes. What additional thing it brings on the plate is its sensibility, its additional sensibility to the what do you call, constantly fluctuating nature of sentient being. It's quite amazing if we think of the reality that is behind the facade of everything kind of staying put as the same. It is incessantly, continuously fluctuating. And then in the midst of that fluctuation, some big changes, overturns can happen for anyone in any situation. And particularly when we juxtapose that with people's sense of confidence that yes, it is going to stay like this, with their arms dropped, with their arms of caution, awareness, mindfulness dropped, it really adds to the gravity of the situation, kind of really makes you feel concerned how they might handle it, how they might undergo it, how it might strike them. It is quite unsettling. But then one has to take reality for what it is. I think, in this respect, let me pull up something interesting. I'm not for worry that it might. Okay, let me. Yeah, in respect to this question of how unsettling it is if we pay attention to what is at stake, what the ground is like, how unstable, how fluctuating the ground is. And in this respect, the Kadamba master Potowa, Geshe Potowa, has something very striking to say. I don't know if I have it here or not. I did pull it up. Yeah, maybe not here. So he says that if that's what you worry, then one should work towards freedom from that. Merely whining is not enough. Particularly if you're whining on these things, that's something that you cannot do anything about, so long as you remain within samsara. Someone is dying because they are subject to die. They are destined to die. They are destined to be sick. They are destined to age. And something destined to happen like that from the very beginning is happening. Why make a big deal about it? If you make fuss about it, then get out of samsara. Let me, if I may, I want to share something on this. I did try to pull it up. Maybe I have not saved it. I will give you a homework. Someone has translated this very particular text. I will not say where, by whom. In Tibetan, it says Najujik na, Chijujik chi, Kejujik ke. So there is this word ju, which in one context means cause. But when it is conjoined like this, Najujik na, means something bound to be sick has become sick, something bound to be or destined to age has aged, something destined to die has died. So it doesn't mean something which has the cause to die is dying, something which has the cause to. Of course, in this respect, it works, but not in other contexts. When you say "Saju yube," do you have something to eat? You do not say, "Do you have a cause to eat?" So, in this Tibetan context, the term "ju" doesn't mean cause, but somewhere it has been translated as cause. Somehow they have managed to make do with it. But if they were to apply the same thing to Satyu, Tungju, which means eatable, drinkable, drinks, eatables, whatnot, it will not work. So this is just what you call a refreshment. And I'm just throwing it out there. So when it comes to translating, I mean, I want to emphasize this. From my own experience, I have known that when it comes to translating, be that from Tibetan to English, English to Tibetan, it has to be always a teamwork. And that has been the model before us in Tibet. Not just that, every rendition has gone through so many, I don't know what you call iterations at the hand of different teams. And the texts have not shied away from even mentioning this. This was translated by this and went through refinement at this time. Went through re-refinement at this time. Like that. Some would have gone through so many times. This part about recording how many refinements it has gone or not is recorded very well in the Tibetan scriptures. But very often the authors would not give their name, would not care for any fame name. That's quite amazing. But in most cases, the translators have been named, right? Who they have worked with, and then who came next and did that. So, yeah, I just wanted to emphasize from my own experience, be that translating science or translating Dharma text, yeah, teamwork is real must. And that has been the model from the get-go in Tibet with the royal decree. And that's what very possibly may account for the quality of translation. And I have this testimony before you, even in this era, right? If we don't do work, if we don't translate as a teamwork, then yes, such things can happen. And I must tell you, I haven't gone hunting for this. Okay, this has just appeared to me when I was wondering about this particular statement by Potowa, and I thought what it might have been translated like, so that I could have an easy translation, readily made translation. I came across this. That really kind of got me thinking. Okay, so by now you should have gotten some clue to where to look. Anyway, and who knows, there may be so many. And I have also come across similar things in other texts also. I have noted them down, and if I may, very soon I'm going to do a translation workshop for the monastics in India, workshops on translating science. I'm going to use this as examples of why teamwork is very important. Still, I'm determined not to say where I found this, who did this, whatnot. The main thing is to kind of make this as a reminder, as a what do you call, a wake-up call for people to be aware and see for themselves where things could go wrong. Now, this is not a very significant topic, but who knows? It could happen in other cases also. That's the reason why I shared that statement from Maitreya's, I think Maitreya's or maybe Asanga. If it is Dodoyen, Ornament of Sutra, then it is Maitreya's. Yeah, there is a statement particularly to this effect, kind of pleading, please don't mess up with the Buddha's system, structure, scheme that he has laid out. In these respects, he knows most better than anyone else. So trust in him. If at all one is going to share things and break from the rule, whatnot, do declare it. Just as in the same spirit as we do in the West. Disclaimer. Okay. So stanza 8. I praise the compassion that also focuses not just on the sentient beings, but also additionally on the phenomena, not the phenomena, on phenomena that sees all beings, again, all beings, in their impermanent nature, in impermanent aspect, on top of suffering aspect, in their impermanent aspect. Like ripples on the surface of a water or river, not lasting even a moment. So I said one could use, not just use, even the scripture itself uses the same metaphor of moon reflection on the surface of the water. And now eventually wind blows, not a strong wind, but a very gentle wind blows, enough to cause ripple. Earlier it was settled, now it is rippling. And now you can imagine what the image of the moon, what the reflection of the moon would look like. It would be like a moving flag, right? It would be like a moving flag with a ripple. And that's how all compounded phenomena are in the nature of fluctuating, not remaining even for a moment. Constant movement. And in the case of samsaric situation, in the case of conditions generated by, caused by, governed by afflictions and karma, that change means change for the worse, degeneration. And that degeneration could be a natural degeneration momentarily, or on the basis of that, it could be a very drastic degeneration. That's what we are all subject to. It could, I mean, the pandemic really showed the moment it came, the whole ground kind of became shaky. It was shaky like that, but we weren't aware of it. And pandemic, it took just this widespread, uncompromising, unflinching, though invisible, yet so massive. This pandemic, it took us, this pandemic, to kind of really connect with this ever-present ground of ours of this unsteadiness. So it makes, when we realize this, and also think of it being unavoidable, then we begin to kind of rise out of that worry, anxiety, unnecessary worry, anxiety, and make a sense out of it. What would be the fitting, sensible way of dealing with it? Making the most of the moment one has. And that, the nature of the meaning that one would eke out of it will very much depend on one's own level of awareness, one's own level of what one values, how far one's insight goes, how broad is one's horizon, how deep one's insight goes in terms of what things are, what not. Depending on that, one would utilize this moment in the best way possible. So someone for whom wine is the most valued thing, then awareness of this unsteadiness will make them think like life is too short to drink cheap wine. So it really makes a difference. And that kind of a feeling, one may or may not have expressed it, that would be on the surface of one's mind, and one's whole movement and what do you call, one's own whole movement and moving around will be shaped by that, will be informed by that. And to that extent, one would gather what you might call value, meaning, whatnot. So there's this great need for not just become awake of this reality of unsteadiness. It could be gone anytime, and it is actually kind of every moment is very different, and it could be very drastically different based on that ever-changing, shaky ground. And rise to that occasion of how valuable all we have. I mean, we usually say that all we have is this moment, right? This moment is what you have, for sure. Everything is past. The future is uncertain. The past is gone. This very moment is what you have. And in a way, that is enough for us to really make the difference. But that will differ. That will vary in terms of our awareness, the depth of our awareness, the extent of our horizon, in what we allow within our space, within our mental space of awareness. Do we want to just limit it to this very life? Then the whole notion of what is of value, priority will differ. If we extend it a little more, it doesn't need to exclude those values, but include more on top of that, and even transform those values beforehand. And that goes like that. So we could be saying, I mean, it would be good to ask itself, what is life too short for not doing something, right? And what is life too short for doing something? It would be amazing to really check oneself. What is life too short for doing something, right? What is life too short for not doing something? that you should be doing it right here and now, whenever you have the opportunity for. So in the case of this conscious, this compassion, bodhisattva, not just living at things being impermanent on their own, be sufficient, but rather connect with that, generate awareness of it. Now let that reality there make a big difference in how one views the world, how one views oneself, how one relates to others, and thus bring that in to one's awareness of the suffering of others, and let that suffering be seen in a much more fuller context, and thus gain or bring in an added stimulus for the sense of genuinely reality grounded concern. And to that extent, the entailing actions, the entailing practices, and the seriousness of it would grow. And to that extent, the practices that need to be done would be even more informed, the more deeply informed, the more deeply ingrained and whatnot. So, how does this work? Is the bodhisattva has developed this insight into the impermanent, ever fluctuating, incessantly changing, fluctuating, pervasive condition of things, and on the basis of which kind of serves as a very, very fertile breeding ground for any big topsy-turvy change to happen for oneself, for others, and thus begins to develop this sense of concern over others. Yes, I think it may be fitting to see how would this sense of concern, how would this sense of empathizing with others come? So this has to do with what does it take to generate compassion. Of course, ordinarily, just seeing others suffering could generate a temporary, temporary urge, temporary stirring of emotion, but it could just fade away right then and there. So what is needed in generating genuine compassion, let alone genuine great compassion? Genuine compassion, genuine immeasurable compassion, of course, genuine great compassion. It requires seeing two things, right? One, how others are at stake, how others are at risk, how others are undergoing suffering, how others are caught in this samsaric mechanism. So if we take samsaric condition as the field of concern, then how beings are caught in this samsaric mechanism, inescapable samsaric mechanism. And then on top of that, one has to have developed a sense of cherishing, sense of belovedness towards others. And that would come by reflecting, realistically reflecting, sustainedly reflecting, and seriously reflecting on how we are connected, how we are indebted to them, how valuable they are to us. So reflecting on that generates a sense of cherishing towards others, sense of belovedness. That is called the cherishing loving kindness that precedes generating compassion, that wishes others to be freed from suffering genuinely, or that same cherishing loving kindness that cherishes and sees others as beloved and cherished, that generates the loving kindness which wishes others to have joy and happiness and the causes of it. So these two things, being able to see others in the light of being cherishable, belovedness, endearing. So yes, another good translation for the other loving kindness is endearing loving kindness that begins to see others as endearing, not on the basis of any superficial consideration, but on the very basis of what they are going through, what they are subject to, what they mean to you. So in this respect, reflecting on their kindness during their time of being our mothers, their kindness, even here in now, in this very life, basically developing sense of gratitude, connectedness, gratitude. That will serve like an alchemy, that will really turn our perspective against them, turn our perspective around on them. In this regard, it is very important to see how so much we gain, from others, irrespective of their temporary relationship with us, even considering just this very lifetime. So many of the knowledges that we value so much, we gain from our peers, our friends and our peers, as much as we do, or maybe even more than what we do from our teachers. And that's something really goes unnoticed, unacknowledged, unappreciated. Very often things we have learned, even if that be cooking something, buying something, what to make, what is available. Oh, in my case, I have a list that I go for. I go kind of feeling so grateful. When I'm driving, I kind of view the person, particularly when I'm driving on a new road. It's like someone is up there, always ready to show me where to turn, what to avoid, what bumps are there. They kind of show me. It's like, oh, look, just follow me how I do. And they happen to be in that vicinity, and they show me. Sometimes there are occasions where I could have really missed the turn. Sometimes the roads are so wide that you hardly see where the divide is. You could very easily enter into wrong direction. Let me tell you one story. One time, I almost drove on a ramp into a truck, into a pickup truck. The pickup truck was, I don't know why in the world the ramp has been kind of kept open without withdrawing it, and then there was no light whatsoever on the vehicle, because it was just having to be it just happened to be parking on the side, and the road happened to be totally unfamiliar one for me, because I had gone on some business, had to come back late at night, and I was driving like a dutiful, what do you call, lawful driver on the side, on the right side, right, not rushing into the middle one. And then it so happened that all of a sudden I saw this line of vehicles, beginning with a pickup truck with its ramp open, with no lights whatsoever. I almost drove along it. I still remember how it could have turned very different than an adventure. What if as soon as I got up there, the driver turns and then drives it? I will be in some other country, some other state, with my car in a pickup car. So that's a slightly not so related story, but nonetheless with having to do with cars. But yes, It's like if you appreciate and you are aware, every moment, not a single moment goes by where people are around there to teach you, either to do, to what to do, to what not to do, to what could happen, what to avoid, or at least giving us the option. What do you want to do? This is something to be done. All of that. And then if that's the case, then we could be learning from somebody else that they had learned this from. A simple tip as what could be bought, what is available, could go a long way in really connecting so many people to that. And that simple thing that you just casually learn from someone, that is so much value for you. How it meant. So it's just a matter of thinking. It doesn't necessarily have to get kind of really go beyond this life and to kind of develop this sense of our connectedness and gratitude, even here and now. Take the case of pandemic and the vaccine. We hardly know who are the people behind this. So many of the volunteers who kind of put themselves up as subjects of experiments, and how big a deal it is for us, given the relative security that we have. And then along that goes, what does that mean in terms of opening opportunity for us, including this session that we are able to do it in this relative calm, relaxed way. So on top of feeling concerned about sentient beings on their suffering based on our sense of a genuine sense of appreciation of their connectedness, of their role in our life, of their continuing contribution before, here, and in the future. And then if we extend it into the Buddhist context, bodhicitta cannot be had without a single sentient being, if a single sentient being is left out of it. So it kind of hinges on all sentient beings. And bodhicitta is a must for achieving our destination, our goal of awakening. So valued for fulfilling our aspiration to serve others. It hinges on each and every sentient being. They hold the key. Of course, it takes for us to kind of pursue proper perspective, whatnot. But basically, we cannot do without having sentient beings as an object. We cannot just come up with a fictitious sentient being and then generate bodhicitta. We cannot do that. So that's why the expression in the Bodhicharvatara, when it comes to the object of accumulating merit, be reminded there are two broad objects, two broad categories, Buddhas and sentient beings. They are equally playing role in our accumulation of merit, which is very crucial in our spiritual progression to culminate in the achievement of Buddhahood that we want. Which is not to say that they are both equally qualified, equally equipped with same qualities, whatnot, but they serve with their differences, wide as they are, in their respective ways in being this irreplaceable object of our merit. Yeah, we can expand on this. You are all aware of this. So it takes a special, taking out special time in kind of reflecting on them. And as I said yesterday, Tsongkhapa really shares this key in terms of when it comes to developing qualities, it takes three things to be done in relation to that particular topic. One, try to be very resourceful in approaching it from so many different ways. And in that respect, he really recommends going through classical texts, the heavy-duty scriptural texts, which are kind of geared towards everyone to study, not kind of tailored to one specific person with specific karmic condition or karmic situation, but rather something that everyone should be able to access and should be able to relate to, that kind of speaks to everyone. And there it presents just about any topic in such a variety way, in such a resourceful, rich, what is the expression, multifaceted way in the yeah, there's another expression there. Anyway, so that's one thing. Another thing is, whenever one is practicing it, one has to practicing it seriously, not just in a wayward way, but rather at least whatever one is supposed to be doing, try to do it. Say if it is a meditation on compassion, kind of do it with all focused presence there and there. That will ensure the message or the impinging or the practice going deeper. The first one will help in making you capable of doing the practice or generating compassion in so many different ways. The other one is whatever compassion you generate, if you do it with that sense of focus, attention, seriousness, then it will help in making the practice kind of take root. And then the third key is doing it regularly, again and again and again, not just giving it one shot, but again and again and again. And that will ensure the practice to last long, endure. And this is more true in the sense that the obstacles that we are working against are something so ingrained within us, something that is so steeply ingrained within us that a mere singular or double dose, once or twice dose of antidote will not be enough. It has to be sustained, regular, sustained, focused, multifaceted focus. So one may wonder what this particular compassion may look like in terms of when one feels it, what is additional in there. So that part is quite interesting. What does it mean is, at the time of generating compassion, one happens to be retaining the force, the influence of this insight into impermanent nature of things that one may have just generated beforehand. Or one may already have it, but one happens to recall it, and thus, at the moment of generating compassion, one happens to retain the fresh influence of it. Thus, the influence of it kind of, what do you call, what is that? Spills over the compassion. So not only it sees suffering sentient beings in being suffering in the way in the case of the previous one, but tinged with, colored with, or what do you call, induced with this additional sensibility of their being very, very fluctuating in unpredictable, changing nature. And the scriptures care to call that as bringing additional aspect for the compassion to focus on. So very often it says it focuses on. Now here, interestingly, in the case of the second compassion, it says it focuses on phenomena. It doesn't say it focuses on impermanent nature. But that's very strange. So this is exactly what I'm saying. When it comes to translating into English, one has to be creative. Cannot just be transporting words. Or in some cases, this serves a purpose because that asks for taking time in explaining it. What it is the compassion on top of seeing the suffering nature of the sentient being. It sees that same sentient being in the condition of being just totally dependent on its basis of imputation, or you may call on its basis of the aggregates, and kind of being very aware of its fluctuating nature. The basis, the aggregates themselves, together with the person, is so fluctuating, and thus the person is the phenomena depending on its base, the aggregates, and it sees this conjunction of the base and the based, the basis and the base, the base and the based, kind of being equally fluctuating. So it brings that aspect of the reality to bear on its sense of concern over the suffering of it. And now here we are talking of impermanence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be confined only to the impermanent nature. On top of that, it could extend into seeing other aspects of reality, not quite the lack of inherent nature, not quite the emptiness, the subtle emptiness nature, but all other in between relatively grosser aspects of its fluctuativeness, beginning from its being impermanent to being its of its being selfless in the grosser context, be that of even grosser one or the grosser one, or less or slightly deeper one. Namely, I'm speaking of the being devoid of any selfhood, that is diametrically different, separate from the aggregates in terms of its basic qualities. The aggregates are seen as impermanent. This self is seen as permanent. The aggregates are seen as dependent. The self is seen as independent. The aggregates are seen as with parts, composed of parts, but this self is seen as unitary. So seeing through that mistaken notion and seeing the person as equally sharing in the same, what do you call, delicate qualities as the aggregates on which it is based, it is just barely based, and on top of that, seeing its suffering nature. So those are brought into bearing in doubling down on the suffering limited nature of the sentient being, to develop, to fuel, to stimulate this sense of concern.
Geshe, yesterday you, at the end of the class, you were talking about anger and hatred and saying there's a difference between them. And there is a definition of anger in texts like on mind and mental factors, but I don't think I've ever come across a definition of hatred. So could you clarify the difference between anger and hatred?
Yeah, you nailed it down. You answered it. You answered it. Because first, one thing to clear is in the Tibetan common use, I think it may be even not so different, but in the Tibetan common use, particularly in the community, we kind of readily call kongdo as anger. So it seems like even in the text also, the usage of anger for kongdo is applied because what you have come across. But at the same time, you said you have not come across a definition for shedang, hatred. The reason for that is there's no need of bringing the two together because it's the same thing. So when you look into the text, sometimes it will be so liberal in calling it kongdo at one point and shedang at one point, but meaning referring to the same thing.
But I've heard His Holiness say, or read in books, His Holiness say that there's certain cases where anger is not destructive, but hate is always destructive.
Yeah.
So he does make that differentiation.
Yeah, he does make that differentiation, and mostly he does that when he is speaking to an English audience. That is very true. And you can even listen to his recordings and even live teachings to Tibetans. He would not make any difference between Kongdo and Shedang. But to audience, Western audience, he would use the term anger and then separate it from hatred, which it is in the Western context. But then in the Tibetan context, we readily use the term anger for Kongdo, and then kind of see contradiction in what His Holiness is saying, because he's using the term anger and says it is different from hatred and it has some good qualities in there. So I have a solution. I have a solution to use to translate anger in Tibetan into Tibetan, not as Kongdo, which is what is that? Interchangeable with Shedang, but use Sikpa Sawa, a more colloquial term. Because even in the colloquial usage, Sikpa Sawa will not be considered as hatred. People would rather think of people having the right to be Sikpa Sawa, not Shedang for their own good. Actually, if one thinks carefully, even the term Kongdo should not really connote anything away from what Shedang suggests, because Kong To, the two syllables, Kong means from the depth. To is, I think, resisting or resistance, resisting from the depth of one's being. And she is again from one's depth, from one's mind. And tang means to tangwa means to be I think has this connotation of being inimical. Yeah. So that's how I would see it, and I have myself checked this against my Geshe buddies as well, and presented this concern to them, and also checked into the text also in the Tibetan text on mind and mental factors. Again, this is one area, mind and mental factors. I don't like the term. This is not good. But still, okay, let's make do for that, do with that. So we call mind and mental factors. The text on mind and mental factors, they will kind of interchangeably use Kongdo and Shedang. You will not find them together and make a distinction to them. And I have myself checked this, and I got attention of this when I was studying Abhidhamma. and that's where the source is for almost most of the readily available checks on mind and mental factors, unless one has now what do you call customized it into other perspectives of Chitta Matra, Prasangika Madhyamika. But still, I won't think there could be this shift in terms of the relationship between the two.
Thank you, Geshe. You were speaking about the difference between immeasurable compassion and great compassion. And you said that immeasurable compassion was grounded in dhyana, and that great compassion leaves out no suffering or no sentient being. Elaborate on the difference between those two, immeasurable compassion and great compassion.
Yeah, let me share something. In regard to the relationship, in regard to the dynamics of different compassions, one of the scriptures come up with a very succinct way of understanding it. It says, what is the difference? What is the relationship between compassion and great compassion? Or maybe now I do not recall clearly, but it may be either the relationship between immeasurable compassion and great compassion. But I mean, either way works. So in the debate system, we usually go about understanding the nature of certain things and establishing it in a very clear form by exploring the relationship between similar things, and thus kind of pan out the difference between them, however subtle it may be, and really try to come with a very clear-cut demarcation between them. So let's take immeasurable compassion and great compassion. So I don't recall clearly what the scripture says, but in the same spirit. So let's take great compassion and immeasurable compassion. What is the relationship between them? So the relationship would be four-cornered. There will be a tetralemma, a four-cornered relationship between the two, which means there can be a great compassion, which is not immeasurable compassion. There can be an immeasurable compassion, but not great compassion. There can be one that is both. There can be something that is neither. See how handy it comes, right? It really helps. We are trying to employ that in understanding neuroscience also. But in the Western understanding itself, sometimes the definitions are not that clear cut. So when we ask them, what is the relation? How many corner relation it is? It's quite interesting. We particularly did that in regard to nerve cell, neuron, and brain cell, or nerve cell and brain cell, like that. So anyway, I'm not going to go there. So what would be an immeasurable compassion but not great compassion? So for the sake of convenience, cutting short detailed explanation, the immeasurable compassion within the continuum of a Shravaka is an immeasurable compassion, but not great compassion. The great compassion in the continuum of a bodhisattva on the path of seeing, or maybe bodhisattva or someone at the brink of becoming bodhisattva, not quite yet, but who has not yet developed a dhyana, who has not yet developed that concentration practice of dhyana. So concentratively, he or she may not be that at par with the Shravaka, but in terms of the expansiveness of the mind and whatnot, and then an understanding of emptiness and whatnot, they have additional things. So there could be someone who has generated great compassion and maybe just at the brink of generating bodhicitta, or even be at the very tip of being a very fresh bodhisattva, right? Whose great compassion is great compassion, but not immeasurable compassion. Not because of any other things, except for the concentrative capacity. Now, in the case of something which is both great compassion in a bodhisattva, say at the Arya level and others, they could be considered both great compassion and immeasurable compassion. Now, you have to come up with something that is neither them. Yes. Venerable Punjila. What was that?
Ordinary beings in the continuing.
No, you don't have to look that far. Just say your computer.
Yeah. I always think of me first before the computer, Geshe. That's why I said.
Okay. So let me hear what you were going to propose.
In the mind of an ordinary being.
Yes,
Like
exactly. Who has neither the concentration practice, dhyana, nor of course great compassion, but compassion just barely getting by. Yeah, exactly. So the dhyana practice, as you know, dhyana has to be understood in the perspective. Dhyana is far. It is a concentrative practice, but much beyond shamatha. Shamatha itself involves those 9 steps of concentration practice, and eventually one has the shamatha. But that belongs to the dhyana realm, dhyana type, dhyana typology. No, dhyana type, but not quite dhyana. The shamatha is the tip of the preparation or the stepping stones to dhyana, the first dhyana. And there are, even by standard classification, 5-6 steps in between. And that's first dhyana. So one has to have developed this concentration on this one side, and then develop compassion, and then the combination of that kind of makes for immeasurable compassion. That is the very reason why the immeasurable compassion, the immeasurable 4 immeasurables, are called Brahma Vihara. It has a literal meaning to that. Sometimes people just take it as a metaphor and say that, oh, it is what divine, like abide, abode, like that. No, it is very literal, in that it takes at least a dhyana and up for one to be even karmically born into either form or formless realm. So our positivities, no matter how much we generate, even bodhicitta, whatnot, that will not throw us, that will not impel us into a form realm birth. We have to earn it separately. Separate visa system works there. I hope that did explain some.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
We have one question from online. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, this person is asking, why do we need to distinguish love and compassion? When we wish others happiness, doesn't that mean wishing them to not have suffering and vice versa?
Yeah. When we differentiate between them, it is not to say that we should not develop both of them. We should be wary about mixing them. Not that. It is a means of calling to our attention the richness of our mental capacities, and kind of for the sake of what do you call locating, developing, whatnot. And in some cases, it will help in kind of really directing one's attention to what needs to be. That it comes handy in having what do you call principally, or yeah, having in principle defined them separately. Otherwise, otherwise there is not much difference. And particularly when it comes to love and compassion, particularly in terms of love being the wish for others to be joyful and happy, and the compassion, the wish for others to be free from suffering or whatnot. When it comes to generating them, when it comes to generating the potential for them, they are together. They are simultaneous. When one has generated the capacity for compassion, one would have generated the capacity for loving kindness, the loving kindness in the spirit of wishing others to be joyful and happy. So it makes big difference in really kind of making a distinction between the two, while at the same time saying they too are kind of in principle are generated together. There is no order in terms of what comes first and what comes next. The scriptures take special care in mentioning that. And then with that as a basis, it makes a distinction between the other kind of loving kindness that we are calling it. We have to somehow call things with names so that we could deal with them and handle them, go about dealing with them. In this regard, I really appreciate the Western system. They name each and every creek and bridge so that it comes really handy in locating where some incidents may have happened. And in the scriptures, it really emphasizes locating, naming. It really emphasizes conventionality as the ladder to arrive at the upper story of ultimate reality. It's a must. So naming really has a big role. So it kind of really helps in explaining things, in understanding things, in conveying things like that. But when it comes to generating them, particularly the loving kindness and the compassion and that same spirit, it's the same. But it comes to same, but where your mind is focused on, there's a difference. It may be focused on suffering, but what you do is make that person have joy and happiness. You are facing the suffering, but you could come out wishing them to have joy and happiness in place of it. And that's love. There's nothing different, nothing what you call anything missing or anything, but it's a way of really kind of pinpointing and what you call locating where their attention is. And that helps in I think that helps in speaking of different aspects of facets of one's practice like that. And you are right in being in these two being almost the same, except for these very nuanced differences, which makes a difference in terms of what one may be paying attention to or what one may be coming up with in terms of wishing, with aspect. And that is the reason, because it boils down to the same thing, but there is a subtle, seemingly not that important, significant difference, but nonetheless making a difference in that very often in other traditions, other religious traditions like Christianity and others, they emphasize love, and then in the Sanskrit tradition, they seem to be emphasizing more on compassion, and then in the Pali tradition, they seem to be emphasizing more on metta, and then in their case, they emphasize more on metta and kind of really make it a more access and approached practice. But when it comes to actually undertaking it, particularly when you look at the standard formula, if you will, in generating metta, it seems to be a mixed bag. When we look from the Sanskrit tradition, it seems to be wishing them to be happy, but also free from suffering. So what I'm saying is, when it comes down to the actual meaning of it, it's the same. It's the same, because one would have generated the same power, same capacity at the same time. So it is quite amazing that the religious traditions, the major religious traditions, have really hit the nail in terms of what we sentient beings need in the ultimate. Ultimately, it's love that matters. Ultimately, it is compassion that matters. And that's what is so clearly reflected in the golden rules. Okay, so nonetheless, it does make some difference in terms of making distinctions and the focus, right? Like that. Okay, I think we should leave it there.